Hello, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for coming. It's a little darker in here today because we're going to be showing quite a few slides, and I wanted you to be able to see them with as much clarity as possible. I'm sounding a little bit better than last week, that's true, and I'm grateful for that as well. But welcome. And if you're here for the first time, welcome and a special welcome. And if you're joining us live on our live stream, welcome to you. And if you're tuning in later on YouTube, welcome to you. And I'm glad that you're here for this very special presentation. And I hope it'll be a blessing to you in the hearing of it and the participating of it as much as it has been for me in the preparing of it. Now, the one thing that I do ask is that if you have any questions, that you pop out with them when they occur to you, and feel free to ask questions or to make points as we go along. Otherwise, I just tend to get too involved in what I'm doing, and I'm powering right through. If I don't acknowledge you when you indicate that you have a question, then feel free to say, "Hey, I have a question." And for those of you who are watching on live stream, as always, you can send your questions through to Melissa. There she is. And Melissa will make those questions known to me as well. So let's begin. On just one final note, for those of you who are here for the first time, we have the back catalog of all of our studies on our website, and you can look at it. You can either watch them in video, or you can download the PDF or read the PDF. And if you want hard copies of the printouts of the Bible study notes, we have those available every week as well. I think that covers it. Any questions so far? Yes. Boy, I didn't expect one right off the bat. Yes. You're talking about when Jesus, the Gospel of Luke, is coming down the Mount of Olives, and he stops and he weeps over Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, if only you had treated the prophets properly, I'd gather you together. If you only knew you were coming, I will gather you together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And there's a spot on the way down the Mount of Olives, a church called Dominus Flevit, which means the Lord wept. And the church by Berlucci is supposed to look a little bit like a teardrop, and it's a very beautiful place to remember that exact passage. I'm actually going to go, and I forgot my tea, and somebody said I sound better this week, but I'm not. My throat is not fully recovered yet because I won't stop talking. Excuse me. He's back. I'm breathing in this thing. It's making a big noise. There we go. Okay. So every year at Zion, we have a Stations of the Cross service on Good Friday, and I hope that everyone can make it to that. Because for many people, along with our Maundy Thursday communion service, it is the most important service of the year. And in that Good Friday service, we journey through the Scriptures and we follow the path that the Gospels trace, the path leading from the arrest of Jesus to his place of crucifixion and entombment. Now, traditionally, there is something called the Via Dolorosa, not the Via della Rosa. I've heard that often pronounced that way as though it is the way of sorrow, or the way of roses, but Dolorosa, Via Dolorosa means the way of sorrows. And from the earliest days of the church, Christians in Jerusalem and those on pilgrimage to the Holy City have followed the path of Christ from Gethsemane, the place of prayer on the night of his arrest, to Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion. Now, you'd stop at various places along the way, and the Scriptures would be read, prayers would be prayed, as you remembered that night so long ago. And there are accounts of pilgrims who have visited Jerusalem and have followed this path all the way from the top of the Mount of Olives from the Eleona Church on the very top all the way through to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We have an excellent record from a beautiful lady. I don't know what she looked like, but she's beautiful in her writing, named Egeria or Egeria. And she was a woman of some independent means from Spain, and she took it upon herself to make the pilgrimage to Israel from Spain and to go to visit the holy sites. And she writes extensively about those, and we have good sections of her diaries covering this part of her trip. And it's much the same journey that people take today, some 1,700 years later. And so the Via Dolorosa itself is a route that approximates the most likely path from the Antonia Fortress on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount all the way to the Holy Sepulchre, which is the church built over top of the site of the crucifixion and resurrection. And while it follows this approximate path, and it starts right where it says Via Dolorosa in red at the top, it starts just below that and follows all the way through the old city of Jerusalem, this kilometer square walled part of the city of Jerusalem, all the way through to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre itself. Now, the actual streets that Jesus walked are about 15 to 20 feet, maybe 5 to 6 meters below where street level is today. Because Jerusalem has been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. Every time it's destroyed and rebuilt, everything would kind of be leveled off and the streets made again, and then it would be destroyed, and then everything would be leveled off and the streets made again. So as a result, to get down to street level Jesus, you had to engage in some archaeology and start digging. And so while the path remains much the same, because those were the convenient paths, Jerusalem is a city that's built on a number of hills, between 5 and 7, depending on what you count a hill. And so it's a quite hilly terrain to walk over, and that terrain sort of guides where the roads have to go. And so Jerusalem is much changed from the days of Jesus. Every conquest and rebuilding, beginning with the Roman conquests and destructions of 70 AD and 135 AD, and then on and on and on and on, put the street level lower and lower and lower. Now, all that being said, we still have a very, very good idea of where major structures like the Antonia Fortress, which was most likely Jesus' starting point on the Via Dolorosa, and the place of the crucifixion and resurrection are very, very well established by both tradition and by archaeology. And so the current Via Dolorosa is more or less the most straightforward path between those points. As well, the location given to the events marked by the path have a geographic logic, and we'll take a look at that as we go through. So, as a result of that, it's best to understand the Via Dolorosa as a blend of physical and spiritual geography. You're not doing it to say Jesus stepped here, and now Jesus stepped here, and now Jesus stepped here. You're doing it to say, here we remember this part of the story, and here we remember this part of the story, and we make our way through that way. It's with that understanding that in Jerusalem today, the Stations of the Cross continue, thousands of people walking the Via Dolorosa, some carrying crosses, both spiritually and physically, retracing the steps in the path of Christ. I myself, incidentally, have never carried a big cross, but some are very, very impressed to do so. So I'd love to take you there, but not all of us can be in Jerusalem on Good Friday, and quite frankly, it's pretty crowded on Good Friday with crowds of thousands as well. But many, many people would have wanted to go to Jerusalem to walk this path, but of course they can't. And so from the time of the Middle Ages, Christians throughout the world have observed the Stations of the Cross from within their own churches. And the scripture story is retold, each station representing an event in the Passion of Christ, where God's love came into direct conflict with sin and with the brutality of our world. So what are the 14, if you're going along the Stations of the Cross now, you're going to be going to 14 stations. And the present Via Dolorosa developed out of a circuit of the holy places in Jerusalem that the Franciscans developed for pilgrims in the 14th century. Here's some Franciscans here. This guy looks pretty grim. Most Franciscans that I know are a reasonably cheerful gang. Now, who are the Franciscans? They're a Roman Catholic religious order that was founded by St. Francis of Assisi in about 1209. And the Franciscans were made the custodians of the Holy Land in 1335. And in those days, custodians didn't only mean a guy who kept things clean. A custodian is somebody who took care of a place and took responsibility and direction for a place as well. And so in the 1400s, when pilgrims would be going to Jerusalem, it was the Franciscans who would welcome them and establish a hostel for them and bring them around to see the places they wanted to see. Usually pilgrims in the 14th century, if they managed to get to Jerusalem, would spend between 10 and 14 days there. And the Franciscans wanted to be sure that everybody saw things systematically, and so they developed a devotional path for people to follow. Now, incidentally, one of my favorite stories to recount when I bring people to Jerusalem and bring them to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, standing in the courtyard in front of the entrance, is to say in about 1120, a pilgrim named Felix Fabry came with a group of 60 pilgrims from what we would now call Germany. And they made it all the way to Jerusalem. And he said, upon reaching the courtyard of the Holy Sepulchre, we dropped to our knees and sent up a prayer to God because fully a third of our number had made it alive. Whereas most people, when I bring pilgrims to Jerusalem these days, their primary concern is that there's no Tim Hortons. It's just a big difference from having made it alive. Right? So what happened was the experience of the Via Dolorosa would leave this indelible mark on pilgrims to Jerusalem. And so when they returned to their churches, they established marks within their church replicating the way of the cross so that those who weren't able to go could still reap the benefits. Now, if you were to go to many churches, Roman Catholic and Anglican churches, you might see stations of the cross along the wall. Have you ever been to a church that had stations of the cross on the wall, not just ours? Yeah, you see that in many places in the world, many quite dramatic, and there are lots of churches in the world that might have a Stations of the Cross garden, a path where you walk through an outdoor area for that. One of the most indelible ones of that in my experience was a church I visited in Korea that had a Stations of the Cross path, which was quite extensive and very, very moving stations. So in about the 1600s, stations began to be placed on church walls, and these stations or gathering places were centered usually around wooden crosses with a scene from the last journey of the Passion placed before them. Now, over the years, the number of stations has actually fluctuated, anywhere between 5 or over 30. But finally, in 1731, Pope Clement XII did us a favor and said, no, 14, that's the number we're going to stick with from now on. 9 of those 14 events commemorated, 14 stations commemorated events in the Gospels, and 5 were taken from early tradition. I find it very fascinating when I'm visiting churches that have Stations of the Cross to go through and see how these are represented and take some time for prayer and contemplation. So what are the traditional stations? I'm going to lead you through a little bit of a geographical tour of the Stations of the Cross, as though I were leading you there on pilgrimage. And station number 1 is very unimpressive. Actually, there's that black stuff that's hanging there is laundry. But this is actually the back entrance to a school, and it's a school for Arab children. This is in the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, the Muslim quarter. Jerusalem, the old city, is split into 4. The Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, the Arab quarter, and the Armenian quarter. This is the Arab quarter, and this school is established for Arab children. But it is, in fact, one of the Stations of the Cross, because this is built on the area where the Antonia Fortress would have been located, where Pilate had his military command during Passover. And so we would walk, this is on the north end of the Temple Mount, and we would now begin walking west. And as we do, we would come to the second Station of the Cross, where the cross is laid upon Jesus, and this is a church part of the École Biblique Center of Study of the Scriptures, and it's a beautiful church with an incredible stained glass window of Pontius Pilate making judgment over Jesus. We walk further along, and we come to a station which is not contained in the gospel, and this is Jesus falling for the first time, Jesus stumbling. And this station is maintained by the Armenian Catholic Patriarchate. Now, Armenia was the first country to adopt Christianity as their religion, and that was in the very early 300s. There is some confusion about when this happened in Rome. Many people say that Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, in the early 300s, in 316 or 318, established Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, but that is incorrect. What he did was he made Christianity not illegal. It was called then a tolerated religion. It wasn't until an emperor named Theodosius, about 65 years later, that Christianity was established as the official religion. But in Armenia, it was already in the early 300s. That's why there's this Armenian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem, because Armenians had settled there in very, very early years. The two main branches of the church in Armenia are the Armenian Catholic Patriarchate and the Armenian Orthodox Patriarchate. And this one is the Catholic. Now, many of the stations of the cross, well, all of them are indicated. You see that sort of round shield that's there with the Roman number 3? Every station has one of those round shields on it so that you know where you are. And many of them have like a carving in the front, like this is a carving of Jesus having stumbled. And then under you would go into a little chapel where there would be usually paintings and candles and scenes and such like. Just meters away from this is Jesus' station number 4, where Jesus meets his mother, who collapses in shock. And so Jesus meeting Mary on the way. And again, that's another one that's not in the Gospels in terms of the procession of Jesus. But I'll show you a little bit later why it kind of makes sense that this station is there. Number 5, we're back onto some more familiar territory. And you can just, for those Latin scholars in the crowd, Simoni Cyreneo crux imponitur. So the cross was placed upon Simon of Cyrene. And that's what station number 5 indicates for us. Station number 6, you can see the round shield, and under that shield, a little about halfway down, you can see a pillar. And that's an ancient Roman pillar which has been incorporated into that larger street. But that pillar has carving upon it indicating that is the pillar of Veronica. Now, you might know of the legend whereby Jesus is carrying his cross, and a woman comes out and places a cloth on his face and wipes his face, which is, of course, stained with blood and sweat and tears, and has this moment of merciful compassion upon him, and then stands back. And Jesus proceeds on. And later, when she looks at this cloth that she had used to wipe his face, an image of the face of Jesus is impressed upon the cloth. And there are all kinds of legends which arise from that particular moment. Again, not in Scripture, but part of early church tradition. Station number 7 is Jesus falling for the second time. And I wanted to use my fancy new laser, and I forgot that in my office here. Hang on a moment. So this is another form of a map of the Via Dolorosa. And in number 1 up here, this is that Antonia Fortress area, which is now a school. And number 2 is just almost across the street from it. And then we go along this road, and there's station number 3. Now, if you might remember, station number 3 is marked by Jesus stumbling for the first time. And station number 3 is where this road and this major road intersect. And if you're walking along the Via Dolorosa today, you would walk in, there'd be a big crowd of people going both ways in front of you. It's one of the major market streets in the city. And so you can imagine why early pilgrims would say, oh, wow, this is probably where Jesus would have fallen, because look at this crowd going by. Yeah. Station number 4, where Jesus meets his mother, is just right next to it. And why would it be there? Because this, in Roman days, was all part of a military compound. And here, where Jesus exits the military compound, would be the earliest point at which members of his family could be there waiting for him, as of course you would think in all logic they would be. Station number 5, where Simon of Cyrene begins to carry his cross. When you turn the corner here, incidentally, right across the street from station number 5 is Abu Shukri, which is the best hummus in all of Israel. I love going there. Anyway, station number 5 is right here. And when you turn the corner, then you're facing a very steep hill. Remember I mentioned Jerusalem is all these hills. You turn station number 5, and then you got this hill. And you can just imagine Jesus, who had already been quite severely beaten, turns the corner with his cross and looks up at this hill and just thinks, I'm not getting up that hill with this cross. And that's where they grab a passerby, put the cross on his back to get that cross up that hill. And that's the station of Simon of Cyrene. Here's station number 6, where Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. And then we come to station number 7, where Jesus falls the second time. And look what happens. Another major intersection is happening. And so that's where the pilgrims said, oh, this is likely where Jesus would have stumbled and fallen. So there's an internal logic to this. And number 8, Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. And this is an event recorded in Luke where the women are feeling badly for this poor man dragging his cross through the streets. And Jesus basically says, don't feel sorry for me. Feel sorry for yourselves, because the whole city is going to crumble very, very soon. And I'd want to turn the slide over with the laser pointer now. Station number 9, Jesus falls for the 3rd time. Now, why? Well, because to get from station number 8 to station number 9, again, we had to climb a hill. And now we've reached the top of the hill, and we're just looking into now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is, take that church building away, and what you would see standing right there would be the top of Golgotha, the crucifixion ground. And that's where Jesus falls for the 3rd time, according to the traditional stations of the cross. In station number 10, Jesus is stripped of his garments, and you can't really see that very well from inside, but Jesus being stripped of his garments happens in this area right here. This was an additional part of the church which was constructed by the Crusaders, so that they would not have to go into the entrance of the church from the side. This entrance was blocked off by Suleiman to control the crowds of Christians who would come in. But instead, the Crusaders could come up these stairs and visit the 10th station of the cross here, and then enter directly. If you were to keep going straight into the building from there, you would already be then on the 2nd level, where the top of Golgotha was. Station number 11, we're now getting very close to the end of the stations, and this is where Jesus is nailed to the cross. There are often services that are taking place there. This is a Roman Catholic altar, and right beside it is an Orthodox altar, but this is a Roman Catholic service taking place just adjacent to Golgotha. And that is the spot where they remember Jesus being nailed to the cross. Incidentally, just above, like if we had a picture of the roof, I've got photos of this but didn't think to incorporate it, there are mosaics covering this entire area. And if you stand more or less in the middle, right about here, and look straight up, there's one of the most ancient mosaics that has been preserved in the Church of the Face of Christ. A very moving thing to see. Number 12 is the Orthodox altar of the death of Jesus, the crucifixion of Jesus. And it's very, very hard to get much of an impression of this because it's all covered with silver and gold and icons, and Protestants go there and they go, oh, silver and gold and icons. That's not what I was hoping to see. But under here, this is glass. This is glass. And underneath this glass, I'll show you it a bit more clearly, is the top of the rock of Golgotha. And this was a quarry. And as you'll see later, this was a limestone quarry. And there was a spur of rock that was no good for quarrying because it had all kinds of cracks and faults in it. So they just left that there. And this enormous spur of rock sort of marked the area. And there's still parts of the top of that rock that exist today that go all the way down to the bedrock. And those parts are encased under this glass so that you can see the actual bare rock. So I always tell people, don't focus on all the silver and gold. Focus on the bare rock. And remember that this is where the cross, or adjacent to it, 3 meters either way, this is where the cross was placed, where Jesus was crucified. Now, this dear lady here is kneeling in prayer, and where she's kneeling, there's a little spot right here, right in front of her, and she probably has her hand in that, because that is a hole about 6 inches around, small dinner plate size, where you can reach down and touch the rock of that, the top of this rock. The reason why this is all encased is because pious pilgrims would want to bring a piece of the rock home. And so they visit the rock, and chip, 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 and bring a piece back to their home church or to their home or something like this. And so the rock was about 8 feet higher than it is now. But in order to prevent further souvenir seekers, they've encased this in glass. Mark Twain wrote a great account of his trip to the Holy Land in the late 1800s. And really, you got to do yourself a favor and read it. It is, as Mark Twain often is hilarious and very insightful and very modern sounding as well. And Twain was always going after these Methodist clergy who were on this trip with their hammers and their chisels and their bags, who were forever chiseling little bits of stone off of holy places. And Twain said, you let enough Methodist clergy here and the entire Holy Land will be as flat as a baseball field. So that's why those are there. And this lady is in that point of prayer. Number 13, you come down from there, and there is this a large slab of marble. And you can see some people are praying there and probably anointing that slab with oil as well. And that is called the Stone of Unction. And that is where people remember that the body of Jesus was very quickly and hastily prepared for burial. Nobody is under the impression that this is the actual stone. It's well known that this stone was placed there in the Middle Ages, but it was done so that people would have a place to focus their devotion at that point. And really, that's what so many of these areas are about, is the opportunity to focus devotion. And then a little further on, we find ourselves near the edicule. Edicule means little house, and this is a house, a building, which covers the area of the tomb of Jesus itself. It is still contained within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre itself, but it is a box that is placed over to protect the area of the tomb, and the body of Jesus was laid in that tomb. And if you go inside the edicule, you're able to spend a moment in prayer, and the stone bench upon which the body of Jesus had been laid is now encased in marble, again, to prevent souvenir hunters from taking it away. But incredibly, just a few years ago, as a result of some major archaeological excavations, which we'll talk about in a bit, conducted by the University of Athens, who are good at this, and the National Geographic, who funded it, they actually were able to take the marble cladding off of all of this inside of the tomb and discover, to the surprise of many doubters, that this, what is right underneath, is stuff that dates all the way back to the time of Jesus. Many people thought, oh, well, it'll be long gone. This is just sort of a pious fraud. But no, indeed, they discovered the original aspects of the tomb built right out of the bedrock, carved out of the stone itself that were right there. And so that is the path that we're going to follow along on our trip as we continue our preparations for our own Easter journey. And I want to put some of that geography under your feet, not the traditional stations of the cross, but instead the scriptural journey that we are led on by the Gospels, and to give you an idea of what happened where and when and how people got from place to place. Any questions so far? Okay. So, incidentally, these stones are about 20 feet below street level. This is in the convent of the Sisters of Sion. And if you go all the way down to that area, they've done archaeology and so on. And these are the stones, street level, Jesus era, Roman paving stones, just very, very close to, almost immediately adjacent to the Antonia fortress. When you're standing on these stones, you're basically standing on the streets that Jesus and the others would have been walking on that day. It's called the lithostratos. And the carvings, you can see the lines carved in the stone. That's what the Romans did to provide you with a grippy surface to walk on when the stones were wet, and for horses to get purchase when they were walking along as well. That's why those stones are serrated like that. Because it was a hill, and also Jerusalem, this kind of stone, when a lot of people walked on it, it gets really slippery. If it's wet, if it rains, it's very slippery. Believe me, I can tell you, if you don't have the right shoes, you will fall. And so these old carvings are sort of like a tread on the street to keep you upright. De lithostratos in Latin. So into the scriptures in Mark 14. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Now follow him. Say to the owner of the house that he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He'll show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready, and make preparations there." So, where are we? Well, this is the city of Jerusalem in the days of Jesus. Outlined in red is the Temple Mount. Okay, so that's where the temple is. The rest of it is the area of the inhabited city. This is what a satellite view of the old city of Jerusalem looks like today. There's the Temple Mount with the Dome of the Rock in the middle, and you can see how much of the city resembles still the shape that was there 2,000 years ago. The area that we're talking about is that little circle on the bottom where Jesus is in the upper room that is traditionally located now on Mount Zion in what was then the Essene Quarter. And we talked about last week why that was likely there. But that's the area of the city that we're talking about. Okay. Mount Zion is more or less the highest point in Jerusalem. That building on the top of Mount Zion is called the Dormition Abbey. And it was built in the late 1800s, and it's a beautiful, beautiful church, which marks one of the traditional places of the resting place of the Virgin Mary, who was rather than died like you and I, she went into an eternal sleep, and her soul was taken to heaven, according to church tradition. That's why it's called the Dormition of Mary, where we get the word dormitory, the sleep. The eternal sleep of Mary. So that's happening up on the hill, and that is very, very close to where we are going to be looking now. And if we go to that place called the cenacle, or the dining room, where we would go on the second-story walk up on Mount Zion is a building, the second floor of a building that was built only 1,000 years ago. And you can tell that because of the style of construction and all the rest of it. Now, when you're in Jerusalem, only 1,000 years ago is something that actually makes sense. Here, in Charlottetown, you can't point to many buildings that are 200 years old, let alone 1,000 years old. But there, 1,000 years is nothing. This is called a modern building. So why is this place marked? Well, because it is all part of a construction that dates far earlier. And I don't know how clearly you can see this at the distance that some of you are. But can you see these big blocks of stone here? And how there's little blocks of stone all around it? And can you see these arches? These archways over? You can see that this was a much different building at one point than it is now. And the archaeology that they did after the war in 1967, as they were looking for unexploded bombs and so on, showed them that this is a building that had been there since the days of Jesus in its foundation, but it had been destroyed and rebuilt numerous times, but the foundations of it are original to that time. So where we're going is up in this area here for the cenacle. But we're more interested in the geography than the buildings. And so once again, in that bottom corner, the bottom southwestern corner of the city. So what happened next after the Last Supper? When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Where do you go for that? Okay, you're going to start in that bottom corner again, over here, and then you're going to go out this gate, the Essene gate, and you're going to walk around the city and come up to the Mount of Olives. Why are they walking around the outside of the city rather than going through the center of the city? Anybody guess? Crowds is one excellent reason, but there's another even more sinister reason. Yeah, Jesus was a wanted man, right? And so they're not going to go right through the middle of the city. They're going to go outside the walls of the city and walk around to their hiding place. Remember that the Garden of Gethsemane is a hiding place. And in order for people to find out where Jesus was staying, the priests had to pay off an informer, Judas, who was going to lead them to that spot. So it's night, they leave the city, and then they make their way secretly up to Gethsemane. That's about 2 kilometers. And hilly, you're going right through the Kidron Valley to get up. The Genath Valley and then the Kidron Valley. Now, Gethsemane, don't think garden, because Get Shemin is an Aramaic derivation of Hebrew word for olive press. Gethsemane means olive press, a cave in which an olive press is. And it's a cave with a small entrance that's situated in the midst of a grove of olive trees that are lining the mountain. It's separated from the city by the Kidron Valley, but it's got a view of the Temple Mount. But the Mount of Olives and all the trees itself, to be outside, we have this vision of Jesus and the disciples sitting outside around a bonfire. That's way too visible for people to see. Remember, Jesus is in hiding. And so where are they going to be? They're going to be inside somewhere. And the one place to be inside is this sheltered cave of this major olive press. Besides, it was too cold for a night out in the damp. My first time in Jerusalem, I was there in March of the year, very, very close to Easter time. And I was really sorry that I hadn't got a winter coat on, because I was at an outdoor service at a place called Yad Vashem, and it was 1 degree outside. And then it gives you a different idea of that night of Jesus' arrest, which would have been around that time. And we're told it was very cold because, again, you put all the scriptures together. When Peter followed Jesus to the house of the high priest, and Peter spent time in the courtyard, do you remember what it says Peter was doing? Warming himself by the fire. So it's a cold, damp night. They're in secret, so what are they doing? They're hiding. They're hiding in this cave of this olive press. This time of year, March, olives are not ready to be harvested, so at this time of the year, the press is being used basically for storage. to store materials, to store some jars of last year's olives and so on. Perfect place to go in and hide. The cave would provide shelter and warmth and concealment. In the fall, they couldn't have hidden in there because that would be going 24 hours a day from all the harvests coming in. Basket upon basket of olives, jar upon jar of oil, stacked around massive beams of the industrial press. But now in the spring, all it is, yeah. Okay, why does Jesus enter the city so openly, and then now he's hiding? Why isn't he still in the open? Because again and again we're told in the scriptures that the authorities were making plans to kill Jesus, but they were afraid of the crowds. So, this crowd that Jesus quite potentially, and if only you'd been here in the last couple of weeks, potentially this crowd that he brought up with him from Jericho, where he had spent time prior to coming, this crowd follows him all the way up, and now he's got this built-in crowd of supporters, and all those supporters are growing. But what happens to crowds of supporters on the night of Passover? They go to celebrate Passover with their families and their relatives and their friends. Jesus and the disciples are effectively alone. Now's the time to arrest him. And now he's hiding. He also knows he's going to be arrested. This is no secret to Jesus. But they're in hiding because now they're vulnerable. It's night. When he gets arrested, what does Jesus say? Now is your hour. Right? Now you got me. Okay. And so, Jesus goes outside of the cave. He brings with him Peter and James and John, says, watch the door. Watch the door. He leaves the other ones in the warmth and the quiet of the cave. And Jesus goes out a short distance to a garden nearby. He leaves the protection of the cave. And while those who are within and those without are allowed to sleep, and sleep overwhelmed them, Jesus prays. And he returns and he finds his friends asleep. He wakes them up, he goes and prays them, or goes again. And those guys who are supposed to be keeping watch, again have fallen asleep. And what happens? Judas comes. Judas knows where they were planning to stay. And Jesus is now greeted with these oncoming swords and torches of soldiers. And Judas only half surprised Jesus with a greeting, with the betrayer's kiss. And then all hell broke loose. With shouts ringing in the air, the disciples came streaming out of the cave. Now, in the Western world, we're sort of baffled about this kiss, greeting with a kiss. But I'm telling you, in Turkey and in Israel, when I greet my Jewish friends and my Arab friends and my Turkish friends from various pilgrimages, what do? These big, hairy men grab me by the ears and give me a nice, big, garlicky kiss on both cheeks. This was very much the custom of how you greet a dear friend. So, am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. And then everyone deserted him and fled. So, today the cave is still there. You can go into that cave. It's called the Grotto of Gethsemane. And the nearby Church of All Nations marks the place where Christians come to remember the prayer of Jesus on that night ago. So you can go in the cave. The floor is now about 3 feet higher because they're preserving the archaeology of the main floor. You can see here, this is a pane of glass, and there are several of them through which you can look down about 3 feet and see the original floor. But this is the area of the cave in which you can still go in and say a prayer. And we have records of Egeria from the 300s going in this very cave as part of their Palm Sunday observances and Good Friday observances. And just not far from this at all, maybe 50 meters, is the Church of All Nations, so called because many, many nations of the world, including Canada, contributed to its construction. And contained within this church, the Church of All Nations, this is this building right here, is this altar of the agony, and this is a piece of exposed rock. There was initially a church here that had been built in the 400s that had been subsequently destroyed in the times of war. But this particular flattish-looking piece of rock is where Christians remember not the hiding in the cave part of the story, but the prayer of Jesus part of the story from that night so long ago. You can see around the edge how the edge of the altar, this wrought iron work here, looks like a multitude of crowns of thorns. Very, very moving image. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. See? It's all there. So, where do they go now? So they get arrested. Jesus gets arrested up here at Gethsemane, and now they're going back much the way they came, except now they're going through the valley gate right here and through the city to Caiaphas' house, the high priest's house, which is not far from the area of the Last Supper. So they're more or less retracing their steps right to here. So back they come across the Kidron Valley, enter through the valley gate, through the old section of the city of David, back to Zion Hill, and up the long stone steps to the house of Caiaphas the high priest. Those steps have been excavated. Those steps are still there that you would walk from the valley gate up into that part of the city. And so Jesus is put in the dungeon while those upstairs try to figure out what to do. And Peter, who's following at a distance, now warms his hands in the courtyard at the fire. But as he's warming his hands in the courtyard, he's asked once and twice and 3 times, "Aren't you that guy who was with Jesus?" No, it wasn't me. And then the rooster crows. And because of that crowing of the rooster and Peter being remembered there, the building occupying that place today is known as Petrus Gallicantu, Peter of the cock crow. And I showed you last week on the top, instead of just a cross, there's a rooster to remember Peter and his betrayal. You just imagine Peter saying, "Really? Maybe we can forget the whole betrayal thing? Is that a possibility? You have to put a rooster?" So all of this is right over the top of the foundations of the house of the high priest of Caiaphas. And in the very basement of that high priest is a dungeon. Would have been used perhaps as a storage area for jars and wine and so on, but had been used as a dungeon in the past. And there's marks on the walls that people have carved into it who had been held there. And you can go there today and read the scriptures as a pilgrim. This is the dungeon in the house of Caiaphas. This is about 3 stories down from ground level, where Jesus, this or an adjacent cellar like this would have been where Jesus was being held during the trial. So our story continues. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and the teachers of the law and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. Now here, we're going to break a bit with common tradition. We're going to bring Jesus to Pilate, but we're not going to cross the city again back to the traditional Antonia Fortress. The Antonia Fortress is up here, okay? We're going to go over here to Herod's palace, just a very short walk away. Now, why would we go just that very short walk away to Herod's palace? Well, because when he was in Israel, Pontius Pilate, who deeply disliked Jerusalem, but was responsible for the area, Pilate stayed in comfortable Caesarea Maritima, kind of a Las Vegas resort center right on the Mediterranean. A city that had been built by Herod the Great with all of the mod cons, including a swimming pool. And because Herod, you know what it's like when you swim in salt water and you come out and you feel like you got to take a shower and it's maybe not quite as pleasant. So Herod built an enormous Olympic-sized swimming pool in the ocean, but filled it with fresh water. So he'd have still that sense of the waves, but that nice refreshing feeling of being in fresh water to have his bath. So this is the kind of place where Pilate liked to stay. There was a theater, there was a hippodrome, the freshwater swimming pool, the gentle breezes off the Med, rather than smelly, cold Jerusalem. Why is Jerusalem cold? It's in the mountains. To go from Caesarea Maritima sea level, you have to climb 1,000 meters to get into Jerusalem. Up, up, up. But when in Jerusalem for occasions such as Passover, Pilate transferred himself and his retinue to the palace that Herod built in the holy city, Herod the Great, the father of the Herod that we're reading about now, with its 3 massive towers and gardens and baths right in the city itself. And they were luxuries fit for a procurator, which is what Pilate was, especially a grumpy procurator. This image, by the way, is not a painting. It is actually a photograph of the palace that is remaining there now, right by the Jaffa Gate in Jerusalem. So this is where Pilate would have received Jesus for the first time. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar, and he claims to be Messiah, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. And then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee. He's come all the way here." And on hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Herod was responsible for Galilee. Pontius Pilate was responsible for Judea, where Jerusalem is. So Pilate says, "Oh, not my problem." Send him to Herod. So where was Herod? Well, he's not in his regular palace because Pilate's there. Instead, he's in another downtown palace called the Hasmonean Palace. So Herod Antipas, Herod after the father is his name. Herod Antipas stayed in the Hasmonean Palace, his downtown pied-à-terre, in the upper city, as it was known. And the upper city was a very luxurious Roman-style city built in the wealthier part of the city of Jerusalem, rather than the poor part where the average Joe and Jill or Joseph and Miriam would stay. Rich people like the clergymen lived in that area. Those were the days. Well, 10 or 15 minutes at a good Roman marching pace, and they were there. And Jesus, as we read in the scriptures, failed to amuse Herod. And Herod abused him. And he was secretly also afraid that Jesus just might be John the Baptist come back from the dead. Remember, Herod had John the Baptist killed. Maybe this Jesus is the same guy coming back. And so Herod gives him a robe to mock him with and sends him back to Pilate, and Herod washes his hands of the whole affair. And so with the morning in full swing and the focus of the city now turning to the temple for the Passover events, this is the big religious holiday day of the year, or not holiday, but festival of the year, Pilate had made his way during this audience from the Herod's palace here, which is the luxury headquarters, to the military headquarters of the Antonia fortress. And that's where they're now going to bring Jesus, to the temple of the northwest corner of the temple. So here's the Temple Mount. This area would have been the temple in the time of Jesus, where the Dome of the Rock now sits. Gethsemane would have been up around, maybe around here off the photo. But in this top corner is the Antonia fortress. Now, over 100,000 people could gather on top of here. And so in order to keep military control, the Romans had a garrison stationed here that could look over the entire Temple Mount. And if there was a problem, the soldiers could come directly out of the Temple Mount and brutally establish control as they had done in the past. And so once again, Pilate is greeted by the unwelcome sight of Jesus being accompanied by the same angry group of priests and aldermen, and they've now managed to amass a mob of onlookers who were instructed to do exactly what they were told. there's a model of Jerusalem about the size of this sanctuary at the Israel Museum, and there's the Antonia Fortress. The constructors of this model have made this Antonia Fortress much larger, probably about 3 times larger than it actually was. More modern archaeology has overturned that kind of idea. But you can see how that overlooks the temple to establish control. There it is a little more up close, and this courtyard here that you can see just past the towers, that courtyard is that same school courtyard which now houses the school for Arab boys that marked the first station of the cross. No, this is a scale model. All those towers are long gone. That fortress was completely destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD and never rebuilt. It was called the Antonia Fortress after Mark Antony, who was a great friend of Herod the Great. Antony and Cleopatra were buddies of Herod the Great, which tells you all you need to know about Herod. Now, it was the custom of the festival, we read in Mark chapter 15, to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who'd committed murder in the uprising, and the crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priest had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead, and wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. So Barabbas was very easily to hand because he had been imprisoned in the Antonia, and demanding his release would be a way for the crowd to really put one over on Pilate, whom everybody hated. So Pilate, grinding his teeth, instructed the soldiers to set Barabbas free. I always like to say that no one was more surprised than Barabbas was to be released, and no one who knew Jesus would have been surprised if Jesus too would have voted for the release of Barabbas over himself. So that's where we are, the fortress. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, or the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. They began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff, and they spit on him. And then falling on their knees, they paid homage to him, and when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him, and then they led him out to crucify him. And then our journey resumes. And so it's from this Antonia Fortress, this northwest corner of the Temple Mount, that the path of the cross finds its beginnings. And it follows much the same path that we follow today. The Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. And then, as now, it leads you through busy, sometimes steep, and sometimes winding, and always crowded streets right through the center of town, past the food stalls and the merchant shops and the spice sellers and the money changers and the clothing stores and the souvenir hawkers. Because Romans always like to make a public example, a very public example of the people who ran afoul of the law. That was the whole purpose of crucifixion, is to say, see, this is what happens when you fool around with Rome. And so they led Jesus through the busiest of streets on the busiest of days and the busiest of markets on the busiest day of the year. And that's where Jesus was forced to walk. And we've been through them. This is station number 4, Jesus meeting with his mother. A mix of the biblical and traditional. The judgment, the scourging, the stumble, the encounter with Mary, another stumble. And then station number 5, where we read, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. Can you imagine? A passerby with nothing to do with his whole business, but somehow he's singled out for this dubious honor of shouldering a condemned man's instrument of execution, because there's no way Jesus is getting up that hill. And there's no way the soldiers are going to help him. So here's a guy. Up the hills they went, out the Genath gate, outside the city walls to a one-time quarry, which is now a garden of flowers and tombs cut into the limestone. And there was a large spur of cracked stone which marked the top of the place, and which in the right light kind of had the eerie eyes of a staring skull. And so it got the nickname of Golgotha. And the Latin word for skull is Calvary. Okay, so Golgotha, place of the skull in Aramaic, and in Latin, Calvary. We read in Mark, it was 9 a.m. when they crucified him, and the written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Now, for that, we have to expand our map somewhat, because the crucifixion happened outside of the city walls. And to get outside of the city walls, to get where this area of a quarter, this quarry was with the tombs, why is it outside of the city walls? Because you can't have tombs inside of the city walls. It renders the entire city ritually unclean. And so it's outside of the city walls, but the city was expanded about 10 years after the crucifixion with a wall like this to defend, to not only provide expansion for the population of the city, but to provide some defense for an invasion from the north. So this is the church of the Holy Sepulchre. The spur of that rock of Golgotha remains. It's enclosed now within the church of the Holy Sepulchre, but that itself is surrounded by buildings. But you can see the 2 main domes of the church and the bell tower, which dates from the 300s. That area of the courtyard, which we'll see in a minute, is right in through here. The front door used to be over here, but after the church was very, very badly damaged, nearly totally destroyed in about in 1025 to 1050 AD, which news of which, when it reached the Western world, spurred the first crusade to rescue Jerusalem from being completely destroyed. This part of the church, this main entrance over here, is now found inside the building called the Russian Hospice and can be visited. But the whole area of the crucifixion is happening under this dome, and the resurrection under that dome. The marks of the quarry are still to be seen. You can go downstairs into the bowels of it, and you can see the chisel marks still on the quarry stones and the square areas of blocks from where the quarry had been taking place. You can see just about, from here to the wall, or from here to my office away, from where Jesus' tomb is located, they've uncovered other tombs as well. These are kochlim tombs which a body would be slid into, rather than the more expensive tomb where somebody would be placed on a bench. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the tops of Golgotha are now encased in glass, and you can pray at this point of the altar and reach down and touch a part of the stone which extends underneath here, protected from the pious by glass. It was preparation day, so as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. And summoning the centurion, he asked if Jesus had already died. And when he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. Joseph brought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So now it's no longer the footsteps of Jesus we follow, but the footsteps of those who lower him down from the cross. This is a mosaic right in behind that stone of unction I showed you. And they're going to do what they can to quickly prepare the body for burial before the sun sets and Passover begins. Now, fortunately, what are you going to do with this body? Well, there's a solution nearby. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. So you're looking for a tomb close to where the area of the crucifixion was, and there it was nearby. this tomb in which Jesus was laid a handful of meters from the Golgotha rock. This is from a beautiful National Geographic presentation. Here's the wall of the city at the time of Jesus, and the city in behind here, and this massive quarry that had been used, the rocks had been used to build the temple and the city walls. Now this quarry was disused, and so tombs were being cut into the side of the quarry for people, just like a cemetery close to a city today. This spur of rock is the area of Golgotha or Calvary, and this area is close by, about 50 meters away, where the original tomb was located, which is now, I'm going to zoom in a bit, so there's the spur of rock. Here is the tomb, and here's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which encases it. Here's what remains of Golgotha. Here's the tomb inside this building. You see how it corresponds? Yes, Joan? No, that was the hasty, we got to put him somewhere. And Joseph of Arimathea says, I've commissioned a tomb for myself. We can put him in there until we establish something for him. So it was meant to be this hasty, quick, temporary thing. So they go down these stairs. You come down a winding staircase from the top of Golgotha. You make your way past the stone of unction, which I showed you. You keep going through the building. You come around the corner, and now you're under the big dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and there's the edicule, or little house, in which is contained what remains of the tomb of Jesus, the place where his body once, albeit very briefly, did lay. Now, following negotiations, this is what this looks like inside the tomb. Now, you can see this is a first century tomb. You have an area where the family could come, usually goes down some stairs, so they show here, an area where the family could gather for prayer or visitation, and then this area in which the body was kept could be sealed off with a stone to keep out predators and other unwanted people. And the edicule now, here is that visiting area. This is the area where the doorway would have been, and this is now covered in marble, the slab upon which the body lay. So you can see how that corresponds. If you can visualize this building being taken away, this is what you're left with. Although this whole thing had been destroyed, the roof had been caved in by the mad Al-Hakim, Emperor Al-Hakim, in the early years of 1000, again sparking the crusade. Now, following negotiations beginning in 2000, scientists and engineers and archaeologists have been working hard to renovate and restore the edicule, and 5 years ago, for the first time in 500 years, the marble cladding which protected the walls and the tomb itself was removed, and the stone bedrock bench upon which the body of Jesus lay was revealed. Now, when I say bedrock bench, that means that bench is carved out of the floor, the rock on the floor. It's not detached, okay? It's part of the stone. That's how they know it is the original thing. And it was right where the witness of centuries said it was. And they've done analysis on this and so on and discovered, again, this is the original thing. Some had doubted, but the evidence was all for everyone to see. It's very well documented now. Now, I was at this tomb together with my son Jacob the very Sunday that they reopened the tomb after all of these excavations and renovations. And all of the main heads of all of the main branches of the churches around the world, the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic and the Syrian Orthodox and the Armenian Church and so on, were all there for this big occasion. And the moderator of the 142nd General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So we weren't left out. So what is it now when you see this tomb? You go inside. First you have to wait in line. This is a short line to get into the edicule and go around the outside just to be inside for just a few precious moments. But if you're patient and you wait your turn, you can crouch under the inner doorway, and you can spend a moment in the very place where Joseph and Nicodemus did the best they could, arranging Jesus' body with as much respect as time and circumstance allowed. And again, everything is now covered in marble, in tapestry, and in icons, which are foreign to our Western eyes, but I like to close my eyes and sort of see through it all to that plain rock shelf which still rests underneath. And when I am there kneeling in prayer, all I can say is, thank you for all you've done, Jesus. Thank you for walking these steps on my behalf. Thank you for suffering the outrage of the priests and the taunting of the crowd and the scorn of the soldiers and the wrath of Roman rule. Thank you for enduring the cross and enduring the separation and resting your battered, lifeless body right where my body itself belonged, but where I now kneel on that cold rock shelf. And then when I leave the tomb, I stand up straight in that chapel of the angel, and I remember a new path that Jesus walked just 3 days after being placed in that tomb, walked on resurrected feet. And I say thank you all over again that God raised Jesus from the dead. And I want to invite you to walk that path with me again on Maundy Thursday as we spend time in the upper room, sharing that Last Supper again together this Thursday. And then on Good Friday, we'll walk the Stations of the Cross around this church. And together we can say thank you all over again. And so to you for coming and joining me on this pilgrimage, I say thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Ken. Yeah, how is the cross propped up? It is most likely that this was an execution ground that was used and reused, and that there would have been, a hole basically carved in where the cross would have been slotted. That is one of the most predominant and likely theories. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, Thursday, 7 o'clock, right here, for our Maundy Thursday candlelight communion. I'm very much looking forward to that. And then Friday, 10:30, Stations of the Cross. We'll follow in that great tradition. And let's not forget, Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, 10:30. God bless you all, and thank you for tuning in. Hooray. Oh, we want to pray. Sorry, people want to pray. Far be it from me not to pray. Let's pray. Dear God, we give you thanks that you have brought us here together, and through bringing us here, you have brought us also along the path which you yourself have walked. And we give you thanks that we've been able to join you on this journey. We pray that as Holy Week continues, you will place our hearts in the right place, that we can receive all that you have done, and that it would move us and bring us to the tomb and make us new with the resurrection. For all those who are hurting or in pain or who are alone this week, we pray your special blessing upon them. Amen. Amen. Thank you for that reminder.